is whether we can join forces and maybe establish a network, a collaborative network, or maybe a network to share information, and whether we can define a project or something. That discussion is going to be on Sunday morning. We are going to give more details about it. I hope today we are going to post what types of discussions we expect to have that day and how to move on from those discussions. But before going into that, we are going to listen to various researchers of the region. Some of them talk about their own research. Others describe what's being done in their home institutions or other institutions in their country so that we can have a glimpse of the theme in our region. So the first speaker today is Gabriel Mindlin. He's been lecturing here at the school that took place from Monday through Thursday with great success. He's an expert on birdsong and also on many other things of biological physics and dynamical systems applied to various natural systems. He's based at the University of Buenos Aires. He's also a researcher of CONICET in Argentina. And he's going to talk about a robot taught these birds a long-lost bird song, which is very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvina, and the rest of the organizers for this wonderful... Okay, goodbye. It's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for this initiative. It's wonderful. I think it's a great idea, and I'm very excited to see so many friends and so many young people interested in these fields. I'm going to be describing this project, which is a very different project than the ones I usually work on, because as many of you who have been attending the conference have heard, in our lab we studied the biophysics and neuroscience of birdsong production and learning. But this work I'm describing is something that we've done in the field, and actually it was started because during the pandemic, we had 2 years in which we couldn't go to the labs, and we had many students that needed to be working on experimental projects, some PhD theses that had to be reoriented, and we had to invent something for these young people to do during those difficult times. So I live in an area that is close to a state park, where this guy here exists, and it's the most common bird that you can find there. It's called the Chingolo, Sonotrichia capensis. This is a songbird. As you can see in the sonogram, the people attending the conference realize it's a continuous description of frequency as a function of time when you analyze spectrally the song of this bird. This bird has very simple song, so it has to learn it. It's one of those birds in which the neural architecture reconfigures itself with experience, and it has to learn, has to be exposed to a tutor, like 40% of the birds. But when they learn only one song, okay? And of course, since I go to that park every day and spend a couple of hours there every day, now I know each of these birds by their own song. They are very territorial, and what I'm showing here is the place where the different individuals live, and as you can see, they all have some song that shares some structure. And also there are differences in between them, because if you look at that one on the top, there is a theme, which is a set of syllables that each bird uses as a signature of their own song, and then there is a trill. And Sonotrichia capensis lives all over South America, so if you live in São Paulo, you listen to this bird a lot, but probably the trill is different, because there are cultures, there are dialects, like we that speak with accents, and you can identify an Argentinian because it speaks Spanish with an Italian intonation, and so on. Well, birds have the same thing, and that is manifested in this species in the trill. But what was interesting then is that we looked into the literature, what could be done with this little bird, which was so simple, and we realized that there was a guy, a very famous ornithologist, that got stuck in Argentina for a few months unexpectedly. His name is Fernando Nottebohm. He's very famous. He's just retired. He's in Rockefeller University. And he's the one that realized that there is neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons that go to the brain and get activated all the time. Well, when he was very young, he had to stay in Argentina to do some paperwork because in Argentina at that time you were drafted into the army mandatory, and he wanted to avoid that, so he had to spend a few months making some paperwork, and he didn't have any equipment, so he would go to the parks and try to take this kind of handwritten notes of the themes of the different birds. Interesting enough, when he wanted to publish that, he went to Rockefeller University where he had a spectrograph, which was a hardware piece of machinery that allowed you to have a spectral decomposition of the song, and he calibrated himself. That's the way in which he built confidence on his notes, and he could publish. You know, can try to imagine trying to do that now. So when I found this, I wondered which of these themes are still being sung, or whether they had changed over the years, and if I could identify those changes. So the first thing that we did is to try to use some, well, the people attending the course know about this, some neural networks that would allow you to find a metric to see whether these patterns are similar or not to the ones that are recorded today. And here what you see is an architecture I didn't talk about in the course, but it's very simple. It's a couple of identical convolutional neural networks, and in the last layer, you have some high-dimensional representation of the data, and you train them in parallel. When you expose to previously labeled images corresponding to different classes your network, you want the last layer to produce a representation where these points are mapped into distant points. And if you train them with things that you want them to belong to the same class, you want them to be mapped close in this last layer. So the idea is to define a metric and use some classes to define this metric and see whether these themes are similar or not to the ones that were sung before. Of course, if you want to train a neural network in this way, you're going to run into a problem that the first thing that the network will try to do is to classify the images according to some rough feature, which is maybe not what is getting your attention. For example, it's very easy for the network to realize that this picture on the left is a handwritten note, and the picture on the right is something that you compute with software. So we had to resynthesize all the songs, the ones that we are recording now, and synthesize songs with some dynamical system that I've been describing in the course, so that all the sounds were qualitatively similar, and we could focus only on the morphological differences of these themes. So this is what we did. We used our dynamical system, the one that I was describing in the first lecture of the course. I'm going to briefly mention that in a minute. And resynthesized first the songs that we were recording in the 2020. And then what we did is we used the handwritten notes of Fernando Nottebohm to generate synthetic songs whose spectral contents would be compatible with his handwritten notes. Now, all these songs are qualitatively similar for the neural network, and we could try to see if we can classify the patterns. So here you see the last, a two-dimensional representation of the last layer of this classifying scheme. And what you can see is that every song corresponding to different themes goes into a different cluster. So the network was trained to distinguish these songs of 2020. And then we superimposed the things that were captured by the notes of Nottebohm. And the thing that caught our attention the first is that some of the themes had a really good superposition. So these are the themes that he identified like things he would hear and that are heard today. So I call them the hits of the 60s because these are songs that were popular then and they are still popular now. So they are still being sung, and the ones that you can find now are the ones that were more sung then. So these are really the hits, and there is a beautiful question in neuroscience of why this is preferred for birds, but this is a different question I'm not going to be talking about today. So this was okay for doing some preliminary work on neural networks. But then I realized that there were these themes, which are qualitatively very easy to identify, which you cannot hear them anymore. They weren't that popular then, and probably since the population of chingolos diminished in the last years, because these huge parts have been invaded by some productive enterprises and so on, some songs, like the one highlighted in red, is a thing that cannot be found now. And looking at my recordings in the previous years, also you couldn't have it in the previous years. So it's something that is not sung anymore. So what I wondered is whether we could reintroduce it again in the field. So a little note on how we are doing this synthesis. Here. Okay, so as we were discussing in the previous classes, what you have is that for these 4,000 species that learn, their vocal organ is basically a bipartite structure where we have these modulations produced by these labia, which are similar to the vocal folds. They contribute to a modulation of the flow, and the time derivative of this rate of mass injection is the source of sound, which are these waves, of course, that propagate through the trachea and oropharyngeal cavity. So in here, you have some nonlinear dynamics. In this case, a very simple model, a relaxation oscillation is a very simple model that has the enough structure in terms of harmonics, enough to reproduce the song of this bird with the right timbre property. And then, of course, what you have is the filtering, which is taken care of by some linear filtering equations, and of course the boundary conditions that define the trachea. Now, you can define very simple motor gestures, like what would be the pressure and the tension, in order to reproduce the modulations of the frequencies of the songs that we were recording, and you can generate a synthetic copy of a song that has a timbric similarity to the real songs of the chingolo, and also has the modulations of the right way. And you could generate this synthesis, and the question was, what would happen if you expose a bird to these synthetic songs? So first we did some experiments that consisted in building with very simple devices. These are Arduinos. Some devices that would allow you to record, to playback, and now we introduce the possibility of sending the data connecting through the satellite phones to your servers. We would have these devices placed in different parts and look at the reaction of the different birds. So our first experiments were what would happen with the males that are defending the territory if you put this kind of stimuli. Like, Diego, ¿dónde estás? Like what you were doing with your Bluetooth, right? So this is what we were doing, generating synthesis of songs. Okay? And we would look at the response of the birds when they were exposed to this. So here you have a set of real songs and a set of synthetic copies. And the first question was, is this synthesis good enough to elicit a response from the adults similar to the ones, the real songs? So when the bird is singing, it's producing a certain amount of songs per minute. And when you place the sound of another male that is invading the territory, what would happen is that they will start to sing much faster. So you play this fake intruder for a while when the song is the real song, and you would get the green curve in here. At the beginning, it starts to sing faster, and this is supposed to be intimidating, and then they will relax after a while. So if you use synthetic songs or real songs, you will get the same responses. If you do a test wedge, you will have that these curves are statistically indistinguishable. And if you play song of a bad synthesis or a heterospecific song, there is going to be no effect on the bird. So the first test was okay. This synthesis was realistic enough to put these birds nervous. And to us, it was very nice in our discussion, our long discussion with biologists on whether, when you simplify the dynamics of a biomechanical device, you are doing some pertinent science or not. So, believe it or not, for me this was a very important result, because when you're a physicist and you do a simple model and a normal form and you say you are capturing the most important things, for us it's very obvious. But you go into biology and you say, I'm doing a normal form reduction, I'm using just a few terms, and I'm doing something pertinent, they will say this is bullshit. Because if you forget all these important aspects that are so important in evolution, you're missing something that is important. So doing these kind of tests is really crucial when you interact with biologists, because you say, well, if the question is of pertinence, ethologically you are getting the same response, so this is good enough. So for us, this was important. But what was really interesting to see is whether a juvenile would take these recordings as tutors or not. So let me show you what happens when a juvenile is exposed to one of these boxes. So what I'm going to play, it's going to be difficult to see, is this juvenile here, which is trying to learn to sing. So it is doing just a few syllables and still not able to do the whole trill. It's just a few syllables, and this is what tells you that it's a juvenile. So here's the bird. It's practicing just very timidly and shyly a couple of syllables. Then you would have this very successful fake male, and he would try to repeat after that his exercise, right? Trying to show that he's trying to do it well. Let's try to see it again. Okay, so that's his thing. So what we did is try to make this fake song that was extinct fashionable in some region. So what means to be fashionable? That not only there was a freak singing something strange, but in that region of the park, this was a cool thing to sing. So we had these three adults which are very energetic and singing at the right times with the right rates, these songs. So we put these three recording devices in here, and they were playing this song for the whole period where you have criticality for the acquisition of the song. So the juveniles have a particular window where they can learn, okay? Then, after that time, they won't be able to assimilate new songs, like what happens with humans. We also have these windows, no? If you are a baby and you're, during the first year and a half, exposed to some sounds, then you're going to be able to pronounce them and to distinguish them. But for example, if you are born in China and you're not exposed to the difference between the R and the L, it's not only then that it's very difficult to generate that sound. You won't notice the difference between the R and the L. And with this, it's very similar. So during that time, we put it in fashion. And this is what happened at the end of January when the juveniles are starting to practice their first syllables. So here is a recording of the box where you have the synthetic sound. And here there was this juvenile doing just the first syllables, incorporating this thing that was absent for many years now. One of these things that not one had captured and now had been lost in the park. So a few weeks later, we managed to find the recordings of this juvenile, now trying to make the first syllables in here. This is the element that was incorporated and wasn't found in any of our recordings of the last years. And this is the signature of being a juvenile. that is just trying to do the syllables of this trill. If now we analyze them with the same neural network we're analyzing before this, you have the playback, and this is what we had. This was the measurements in January and February when the bird was still, it was just trying to make the same attempts to reproduce the song. And here what I'm showing you is what happens with the kids of this guy when in the second season started to teach that to new juveniles. So we have a new dialect that is being introduced in the park with this. Just to finish, let me show you something that was very cool. We were following this guy. Okay, here it is as an adult. And let's see whether we can hear him. Okay? Pa, 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 pa. So this is the guy who was taught by a robot and is spreading this song by, my goodness, yeah. This is Jurassic Park, but the cultural Jurassic Park. So the idea we're pushing is that when we talk about biodiversity, we're always talking about genetic biodiversity, but then when you threaten a population and you have a threatened, when you're threatening the number of individuals, for many animals, there is also part of the information that is transmitted through learning. So when you're talking about biodiversity, you're not talking only about the genes, but also about culture. And this is what we're doing, an exercising where you can get this culture back. So I love this bird, and I just follow it all the time. This got to the cover of National Geographic 2 weeks ago. I'm very proud of that. I'm going to see if I can get money out of that from them. So far, only I can get is petting in the back. So the conclusions for this talk is, minimal models in biology, are they pertinent or not? Well, I think that this is an example where you say that it is. Can a juvenile take a synthetic song as a tutor? The answer of that is yes. Diversity is not only genetic, it's a culture in the animal kingdom. This is a concept that I'm very obsessed about, and I don't hear a discussion about this in general. There is this prejudice that if you talk about culture in animals, you're doing something silly, and probably I am, but I'm very obsessed with it anyways. And then this is an example of how artificial intelligence and dynamics together can be used for conservation. The future work that I'm involved in is using this technology for doing automatic biodiversity monitoring, and I'm collaborating with people of the program Patagonia, which are fighting to preserve two species that are very threatened. One is the macaco viano. There are only 800 individuals of this species, and it lives in the esteros, the Santa Cruz. It's very geographically very distinct thing because it's in the middle of the desert, a few lakes with some vegetation that happens in a specific transition, and the population of this bird was destroyed by the release, by the irresponsible release of bisones, I don't know how to say that in English, when fur coats were no longer fashionable. And the other thing that is very difficult to preserve is this gallineta, which is a bird which is very difficult to visualize because it lives in that environment, but we can follow them acoustically. And the idea that I want to do is, since I know now I have the technology to identify each individual by their voice, is to do a monitoring of what happens to a population that is threatened by following the dynamics of every individual particularly. And I think this is an idea that has potential for being escalated into other projects. Thank you very much for your attention.
So we have time for questions.
Thank you. It was a very, very nice talk. I have a couple of questions, actually. Could you say that this learning process is a sort of synchronization?
you want to think of the learning process as a synchronization.
Yeah, because you have one like the teacher,
Right.
and the other one is following the teacher, right?
Yeah, you don't try to do it simultaneously, so in that aspect it's different, but if you want to think about this generating some motor pattern in the brain and you are replaying and you want to couple with that, maybe you can think of the process in that way. So it's not the way I think about it, but maybe there is a way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have a second question. It's quick. About the training that you do, when you use the CNNs, you use the spectrograms, right?
Yes.
Why don't you use the audio signal directly?
Well, this is a very good question. So the answer is because I'm lazy, and there is so much done in image processing. So neural networks and convolutional neural networks were designed for pattern recognition, visual pattern recognition initially, and all the architecture of convolutional neural networks was based in visual recognition. So this was a big encouragement to me to translate first the sound into patterns and do pattern recognitions, mounting on all the technology that already existed. So I only had to study minimum of neural networks. But it would be possible to do it with sounds, and I'm sure it's a good idea. I'm too lazy to try it, but I agree with you. You could think something smart and do it with just the sound.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So you introduced a song that was already a natural song. I guess that your network could hallucinate non-natural songs.
Yes.
So is it possible that the network has all the complete song space already there? Or do you find that maybe your network hallucinates something that is not real? Or can you comment about this, please?
So I'm going to comment briefly because we're starting to work on that. I'm very convinced that what Hinton and Terry Sejnowski did when they did Boltzmann machines is very close to, in some sense, to things that actually do happen. So I think that the Boltzmann machine concept of them, is close to what happens. And in there what you see is that in the learning, you have first stage during the day, then a degradation at night, where you play all these fantasies and the network is not exposed to the sensory part, and then you have a recovery and so on. And the processes of the Boltzmann machine are very similar to what happens in the bird's brain. Now, you know that one of the lines in my lab is to study dreams. So I do have a record, Facu knows how to record them, of what the birds are dreaming because they have replay that goes back to the masses. So I could explore, actually, how these non-veridical dreams of the network are. So my guess is that it would be wonderful to study, during the process of the learning of the neural network, what the dreams statistically should be like and compare to what we measure experimentally, and see whether the free practices of the neural network has the real dreams of the bird. So there is a student working on that, and I have only the beginning of the project. So maybe we can discuss in 2 or 3 years if the student gets it.
Thank you. So we have time for one last question. I've seen the...
So Gabriel, thank you so much for the talk. I was wondering if this technique of identifying the individual bird from the sound could be combined with this rise of soundscape ecology to do this kind of estimation of abundance and densities.
It would be wonderful to do that. So I would love to do a more comprehensive, many species, many individual, sharing the sound landscape. It's a beautiful project, and I would love to do it. I haven't done it, but it will be a great idea to do it, yeah.
Okay. So we thank the speaker again. And so we move to the next